नमस्ते प्रियमित्राणि सर्वं कुशलं किं तर्हि गतसप्ताहे वयं धातूनां विषये सम्यक् ज्ञानं प्राप्तवन्तः तेषां तत्र दशगणानां विषये के विकरणप्रत्ययाः सन्ति किमर्थं तेषु गणेषु सन्ति पुनः दशलकाराणां विषये अपि अध्ययनम् अभवत् केवलं न्यूनता आसीत् यत् एकस्य एव धातोः रूपाणि द्रष्टुम् अवकाशः अभवत् किन्तु आशां करोमि यत् तेन कुतूहलः वर्धितः स्यात् भवन्तः च स्वयं गत्वा तत्र अन्वेषणं करिष्यन्ति इति अस्तु so namaste dear friends and I sincerely hope that you are a little more confident with the verbs because we have looked at them in sufficient details with the 10 identifying the 10 groups. Following that we also did the 10 kinds of tenses and moods but the only limitation was of course because of time that I could only explain to you one group conjugations, and I sincerely hope that that has stirred your curiosity and that you will look at it further on your own. So in today's class, which is module 6, an introduction to the concepts of vachyam or the voice and the pratyaya and the suffix, we will be looking at lecture 16, which will be an overview of the subantas or the nouns and the tinganta or the verbs and some avyayani or the indeclinables. And I will also introduce the vachyam once more because we looked at it very briefly in passing in the previous week. So we will be looking at the division of the building blocks of a sentence, but why? Because what I would like to do for you is to take you through a kind of a quick overview of all the components of a Sanskrit sentence construction, and then we will dive a little deeper into the dimensions of the Sanskrit words or the subantaha, the nouns, and the tingantaha, the verbs, as well as the avyayani. We will just touch upon them lightly for now, and then I would like to introduce you very briefly to the concept of vachyam or the voice, and then we will do a conversation for building vocabulary and application of the points learnt. Finally, we will close with verses defining daya, and then we will look at some cross-cultural quotes on daya by different enlightened beings. So this is what we are already very familiar with, and what we are going to be looking at in the coming few weeks is focusing on the remaining parts that we haven't touched so far. So here we see we've got the karakams, so we've got the vachyams or the prayogaha as they call it, the different voices. So you've got the active, the kartri karakam, the karma karakam, and the bhava, which is also the bhava vachyam. Okay, so you can also call this the kartri vachyam, karma vachyam, and the bhava vachyam. So these are all the voices. We're going to be looking at that. But before we go on to that, I'd like to take you through a little deepening into the words of the subantas as well as the tingantaha. So what do I mean by that? So we've seen that the sentence has got, let's take these three words here, alright. So we've got balakaha tatra gacchati. So when we're talking of Sanskrit sentences being composed of words, there are largely three kinds of words. The first one is the balaka or the subantaha, and those are the nouns. And then you've got the tatra, which is an indeclinable or an avyaya, and then you've got the gam, which is for gacchati, and that is a tinganta or that's the verb. Astu. So what I'd like you to notice is that the subantaha, and as I said, we are going to go a little deeper into it. The nouns are not simple nouns, they are often composite nouns. So you've got, they are made of the root word, the pratipadika, plus a pratyaya or a suffix. And the pratipadika at times is independent and free, which is shuddha, or it can be a construct of different additions of suffixes, which are known as vritti. So this using of many words in order to form one word, to abbreviate, not to abbreviate it, but to shorten it into one word is what is known as vritti, and we look at that a little more in detail. And then of course we know that there are the lingas. Once the root has been formed, we have to determine whether it's a pullinga, strilinga or a napunsakalinga. Trilinga jnapanam bahu avashakam asti. Anantaram tatra antaha कीदृशः अन्तः अस्ति पदस्य तदपि बहु मुख्यम् अस्ति कारणम् अन्तस्य आधारेण एव शब्दस्य रूपाणि भवन्ति. अस्तु, अनन्तरं कारकानि विभक्तय cases, we've looked at that. We know the sankhya, we've done ekavachanam, dvivachanam, etc. Now let's look at the verb side of the story. Okay, so again this is in brief, we will go a little deeper into it. So tingantaha, so again just like we had for the subantaha, they were composed of the root plus a suffix. We see that there is a similar thing happening in the area of the verbs. So you've got the dhatu or the dhatavaha in plural plus a pratyaya. Also this together will give you the 10 groups. You remember the vikarana pratyaya that we saw, and that is what determines which group that particular verb will go into. Okay, but before that also there is another concept called the it. Okay, so this it is something, it's like an e that gets added to the conjugation of certain verbs. So bhu dhatu will become bhavita. So it gets this it in a particular tense, and therefore it is known as sa it, so sate. So there are some groups, but they can be spread across the 10 groups. So it's not like you can make a sweeping generalization about them. So there are some groups which will, some verbs which will get the it, so it becomes sate. Some of them don't get it, so labdha, for example, labdhatu, it will become labdha, it doesn't become labhidha or something like that. So labdha, and therefore it is anit, it doesn't have an it. And then you've got some which can have both, which are known as the va it. Okay, so wait, it becomes there. Okay, and then when we were talking of, you remember, every verb has to have a phala as well as a vyapara. We see that what are these phalas that they can have? So the phala can typically be that it is a sakarmaka dhatu, which means that it is a transitive verb and then it has an object. Now some verbs can have a double object, alright, so which becomes a dvikarmaka dhatu. And you also have the intransitive verbs which are the akarmaka dhatu, there are no objects there. That will become important when we are looking at the vachyas or the voices. Now the other kind of fruit that you can get out of a verb is whether that fruit is enjoyed by somebody else, in which case it becomes a parasmepadi. Swasya krite eva yada bhavati tada tad atmanepadi bhavati. Punaha yada dvayamapi shakyate tadanim tatra ubhayapadi bhavati. It becomes an ubhayapadi. And then we saw one part of it, you remember, was the phala. The second part of it is the vyapara. So in the vyapara, that's where the action and the process is happening. So that's where I thought these become relevant. So we have the kala, of course. In the 10 lakaras, we saw that there are again two kinds of lakaras. So one is a sarva dhatukaha, and you've got the ardha dhatukas, which are the non-conjugational verbs, they say. And so you've got the sarva dhatuka and the ardha dhatuka. And then of course you've got the sankhya and the vachanani and all of that. And another important aspect of the sentence construction is in which voice are you saying the entire sentence? What's the relationship between the subject, verb as well as the object? So those are the voice or the prayoga or the vachyam. So here, as you can see, tatra karakam, it can be the kartri karakam or the karma karakam relating to the kartri vachyam and the karma vachyam correspondingly. If it is a kartri vachyam, then you have the prathama, madhyama and uttama purushas also, the persons get added there. And then you also have the bhava, which is the medio-passive kind of a voice, and that is the bhava vachyam, that is for the verbs that are intransitive. But we will look at all this as we go ahead. So what are the formations of the subanta or the nouns? So I try to break it up further for you here. So you see you've got the padani, and then you've got of course balaka, tatra and gam, and we've seen that you have the subanta. So in this particular table we are going to be focusing on how does the subanta form. So the subanta we are seeing largely are 4 types, chaturvidha santi. Tatra asti visheshyam, which is the noun, and then you've got visheshanam, which is the adjectival, and then you've got sarvanama or the pronouns, and then the sankhya or the numbers. So one thing I'd like to tell you that there are different grammarians who will order these things differently. The classifications vary across grammarians. So some will put sankhya here, some will not put it here. So the book that I am following basically has put it here, and the book that I am following is called the Shabda Manjari. Alright, so this is the book that I have used for most of the session here. It's by R.S. Vadhyar and Sons. Astu. It's an excellent, it's a small book but very, very convenient. Tari etat kripaya pashyantu. Astu. And so we've got the 4 kinds of subantaha prathamataya. But we know that the subantas are not all just independent root forms, they are sometimes composite. So you've got the pratipadikani, which is the root form of the word. Sometimes they are independent and shuddha, as in there is no mixture that is happening with the pratyaya, and then they are also, they have the linga. Sometimes the gender can be known independently, sometimes it needs to have the pratyaya to tell you which is the gender. Alright, so I have given both options there. Another important thing of course is the ending of the word, so that needs to be taken into consideration, and then of course what is the linga, masculine, feminine or neuter. And then you have the combined ones, which are the composite kind of pratipadika. And as you see here, you've got the pratyayas. There is an intermediary pratyayas that will do things to the verbs sometimes, and as well as directly to the nouns. And then you've got the final pratyaya, which would be the sup ending. The sup ending here means the vibhakti endings that you will get. Astu? So between the root and the final su, sometimes you will get different things in the middle that will change the form of that word. Tari atra, as you can see with the sup, it becomes the karakani, vibhaktaya and the cases and the sankhya, vacharani, etc. But what about the pratyayas that come in the middle, and what kind of changes do they bring about to the root form of the noun? So you've got nirmita, and again the book that I was referring to, the Shabda Manjari, had 5 that they were talking about. So you've got the krit pratyaya, so krid vritti, and then you've got sanadyanta dhatu vritti, then you've got the tadhita vritti, ekashesha vritti and the samasa vritti. So 5 vrittis, and these vrittis are basically nothing but when multiple words come together and end up as a single term. So it's the shortcut of a few words put together. Okay, so what's the action movement that you're doing with several words to bring it into a simpler form? So here we see that the krit is actually because of the verb connection. So there is a verb. So the verb plus a pratyaya will make it into a subanta here. Okay, so we had, remember, seen in the beginning, we had seen gum plus lut, which then becomes ana, becomes gamana, or the going. Alright, so you've got the dhatu plus pratyaya plus the sup. You've got the sanadyanta dhatu, which does a similar thing because it falls back on the dhatus. But again, there are several of them. It will not be possible for us to cover all of them. What we will do here is kinchit eva swadamatra atra datum shaknumaha. Kinchit parichaya yad etat sarvam api asti iti. Sanskritam jnatavyam ched etat sarvam jnatavyam asti iti manishaya etadrisha kalpana asmabhir atra prastutam vartate. Astu prastuta vartate. Tarhi anantaram you've got the tadhita, which is the shuddha. So you've got the noun root plus a pratyaya, there will be another intermediate suffix and the sup ending. And then you got ekashesha, we'll talk about these in greater details, but basically they are nouns put together and with the sup ending, and samasa, the compound words that we've talked about in passing, is something that we'll look at in greater detail. So that, as you can see, is also a composition of different nouns, but sometimes you can also have some verbial kind of word roots. So it's nothing as straightforward and simple, and that's what is perhaps where this language can get a little complex. But what I will invite you to do, and this is something that was mentioned in a recent program called Dhara about ancient knowledge traditions organized by the Ministry of Culture and the Indian Knowledge Systems Division. So what Professor Manjul Bhargav, who is a Fields Medal awardee and a professor at Princeton in mathematics, so he was saying that what is fabulous about the Sanskrit as a generative language, it's a generative language, which means that one word gives rise to another word, which gives rise to another word. He says this generative nature of the language has got some remarkable mathematical properties. And as you can see, there is nothing really here that's left to chance. Sarvatra tatra api chintanam asti, tatra ganana asti, if this then that, sarvatra asti. And as I mentioned, that what we'll be able to cover is only literally a bit of the tip of the iceberg, because there is a lot of deeper study that is required to understand all of it in its complexity. What is required is just to gain a familiarity with it, so that when you encounter it in your texts, you are able to at least understand what is happening. Hardware sarvada avashikam nasti, but hardware jnanam asti chet bodhe sahajata bhavati kadachit. Astu iti tatra prayojanam asti. And what we also see is that because the krid has a pratyaya, so it is connected to the verb form, and the avyayas also sometimes take pratyayas, but sarvada na bhavati. So look at the tiganta verbs. So let's look at this second table, which has to do with the verbs. So how the verbs are formed. Just as we saw in the case of the subanta, that you had the root plus the pratyayas, we have similar features happening with the verbs as well. Tari atra kim bhavati? Ting antanam tatra dhatuhu bhavati mule, and yatha asmabhi drishtam asti tatra set, wait, anit. You remember with that, especially in the case of the lut, where you have bhavita. So bhu dhatu becomes bhavita, whereas lab dhatu becomes labdha. So this absence of an ikara is what makes it an anit. So there are some roots that are anit, there are some that are set. So with an it, sa it, set bhavati, and some that are both, so it becomes a wait. And this is something that is indicated in the beginning with the verb itself. It will tell you etad atmanepadi asti, parvasmepadi asti, ubhayapadi asti, anantaram set asti, anit asti, sarvam tatreva suchayanti samanyataya. Okay, so the grammarians often help us out to that extent. And anantaram, we saw that we were talking of the phala. So what kind of fruit will there be? And we've looked at these three. So it can either be transitive or sakarmaka with a double object, which is a dvikarmaka, or it can also be an akarmaka or an intransitive verb. And then you have the three kinds of fruits, which are the parasmepadi, ubhayapadi and the atmanepadi. And we will see as we look at the voice that the karma vachyam and the bhava vachyam will always only get the atmanepadi forms. Okay, so moving on, we've seen that the dhatu plus the pratyayas, okay, with the suffixes gives us the classification of the 10 ganas. And then we have the second part of the verb, which is the vyapara aspect. And as we saw that the vyapara has the three voices, or the kartravachyam, the karmavachyam and the bhavavachyam. And then of course because it is vyapara, you have to tell how many are doing it. So sankhya becomes important. When are you doing it? So there is kala and prakara, and in the kalas you see that there are actually 6 tenses and 4 moods. But in this case we have another kind of a division here, which we just talked about briefly, was the ardha dhatuka and the sarva dhatuka verbs that are there. Astu, verb conjugations that are possible. Tari dashagananam parichayam tu vayam praptavantah eva. Maybe you just like to say it once quickly with me. Bhvadyadadi juhotyadir divadisvadirevacha tudadishcha rudhadishcha tanakryadi churadayaha. Uttamam, these ways of learning the verses or learning these words along with verses is very, very helpful to keep track of them. So this was another chart that I tried to make for you with the dashaganas, their vikarana pratyayas, how they get added, where they are there. So bhu plus shap is the vikarana pratyaya for the prathama gana, bhuadi ganasya, tatra ti plus tari bhavati iti bhavati, punah at tatra kimapi kopi vikarana pratyaya nasti ataha atti eva bhavati. In this manner I have tried to present the whole thing so that it's clear for you how to apply it. Agre pashyama, and this is again another way of representing what we've just looked at with the verbs, where you've got the shad kalavachaka shabdaha santi, the tenses that are there, and they're all marked in blue. So you've got the vartamana that is there, the present tense, the lit paroksha bhuta, past tense or the perfect, lut which is the anadyatana bhavishyat, the first future, the rit which is the adyatana bhavishya. So the bhavishya that we normally use for future is supposed to be only for the present tense. Okay, so there are these licenses that are made. Okay, and then you've got the lung, which is the anadyatana bhuta. So when you're talking the past tense, agachat and all, it cannot be today, it has to be before that. The adyatana bhuta is the lung, or the past tense, or the aorist also, it's known as that. Which are the other moods? There are 4 of them. Prakara bodhakaha santi, keke santi, lot, ajna, or the imperative. Vidhiling, the potential, karaniyam, you may do this, iti bhavati. Ashirling, it's a blessing and may that happen. And then you've got the ring. I just want to mention that in our previous slides there was a slight error because we had mentioned it as bhavishyat, but actually the ring is the kriyatipatil ring, which means that it is the conditional tense. It would have been this if it was like that. So it is the combination of the bhuta plus the bhavishya. And then moving on to a quick introduction to the concept of voices, because we've already been introduced and that's something that we're going to be looking at in our next lecture. Tari atra kartrivachyam kim asti militva vadama lakshanam kartrivachyasya prathama kartrikarake dvitiyantam bhavet karma kartradhinam kriyapadam. Astu. And then you have the karma vachyam. We'll look at it in greater detail when we study it in the next class. Karma vachya प्रयोगे तु तृतीया कर्तृकारके प्रथमान्तं भवेत् कर्म कर्माधीनं क्रियापदम् अस्तु and भाववाच्यं किं वदति भावे कर्तुस्तृतीया स्यात् कर्मा भावश्च सर्वदा प्रथमः पुरुषस्यैक वचनं स्यात् क्रियापदे अस्तु so now I hope that as you are saying the words you are also being able to understand as you say it along astu especially if you know the sandhis you know where to break it you are familiar with the dhatu rupas familiar with the subanta rupas etc tari kinchit sahajataram bhavati so please try to see if you are able to on your own independently start making sense rather than look forward to either my explanation or to the to you know a translation tari prayatnam kurvantu avashyam prapsyanti if you've come this far it's because and you don't have an English translation it's because you have the potential to try and figure out a lot of this by yourself astu तर्हि इदानीं पीयूषेण सह एकं सम्भाषणं कुर्मः
नमस्ते आर्ये भवती इदानीं स्वस्था वा
आं पीयूष इदानीम् अहं प्रायः पूर्णरूपेण स्वस्था अस्मि धन्यवादः
भवती एतस्मिन् सप्ताहे किं किं कर्तुम् इच्छति चिकीर्षति
शृणोतु एतावता वयं सुबन्तानां तिङन्तानां रूपाणि अपश्यामः इतः परं तु शब्दनिरूपणविषये उत वृत्तिनिरूपणम् अधिकृत्य किञ्चित् पाठयितुम् इच्छामि कति वृत्तयः सन्ति कथयतु
आम् उत्तमः विचारः आर्ये वृत्तयः पञ्चतयः
सत्यम् अत्र अवधेयः विषयः अस्ति यत् एते योगसूत्रस्य पञ्चवृत्तयः न सन्ति प्रमाणविपर्यादयः पञ्चवृत्तयः न सन्ति किमर्थं नाम योगसूत्रस्य तत्र लक्षणम् अस्ति योगस्य लक्षणम् अस्ति योगश्चित्तवृत्तिनिरोधः वृत्तयः पञ्चतयः 5 kinds of psychological movements are also described as vritti so this vritti is not the same as that vritti astu though there is a movement concept because the word is transforming into something else किन्तु अत्र व्याकरणशास्त्रानुसारम् एते के सन्ति इति श्रावय माम् तेषां लक्षणं च किमस्ति इत्यपि कथय कृपया
आम् तत् सर्वं महाविद्यालये मया अपठ्यत वृत्तेः लक्षणमस्ति परार्थाभिधानं वृत्तिः अर्थात् या परार्थस्य नाम अन्यार्थस्य अभिधानं करोति नाम वदति सा वृत्तिः सिद्धान्तकौमुद्यां भट्टोजिदीक्षितेन उच्यते कृत् तद्धितसमासैकशेषसनाद्यन्तधातुरूपाः पञ्चवृत्तयः अर्थात् कृत् प्रत्ययः तद्धितप्रत्ययः समासः एकशेषः सनाद्यन्तधातुरूपाः भवन्ति वृत्तयः
उत्तमं तद्धित इति भवति तत्र
तद्धित
अत्र सनाद्यन्तधातुरूपाः के सन्ति
आम् सनाद्यन्तधातुरूपाः भवन्ति सन् प्रत्ययान्तधातुः यं प्रत्ययान्तधातुः तथा नाम धातुः
उत्तमं तर्हि एतत् सर्वं वयम् इतोपि न मिलित्वा दृष्टवन्तः वयं केवलम् एकत्र शुश्रूषा इति शब्दस्य गुरुशुश्रूषा इति सन्दर्भे शुश्रूषा इति पदस्य तत्र श्रु इति धातु मूलधातु प्लस् सन् प्रत्ययः आसीत् सन् प्रत्ययस्य कारणात् शु श्रु वारद्वयं तत्र द्विगुणितम् अभवत् पुनः तत्र टाप् इति प्रत्ययः स्त्रीलिङ्गस्य प्रत्ययः आसीत् इट् बिकेम् शुश्रूषा अ फेमिनिन् वर्ड् but just to tell you that this is just for Shravana Samskara we are going to be looking at all of this in greater detail in the week that will follow so धन्यवादः पीयूषा तर्हि अस्मिन् सप्ताहे एतेषु विषयेषु एव वयं सर्वे मिलित्वा पिपठिष्यामः
अस्तु आर्ये धन्यवादः
धन्यवादः so let's look at the general definition of dharma we have kshama satyam tamah shaucham danamindriya sanyamah ahimsa guru shushrusha tirthanusaranam daya arjavam lobhashunyatvam deva brahmana pujanam anabhyasuya cha tatha धर्मः सामान्य उच्यते इति विष्णुपुराणे अस्ति एतत् वाचस्पत्ये अपि मिलति. So let's look at daya in this class today. So daya means karuna or kripa. Astu tatra karuna is the daya swarupa or anukrosha indicating compassion, or anukampa which is sympathy according to the Shabda Kalpadrumaha. Astu atra dayayaha lakshanam kim asti as a value guna rupena dayayaha lakshanam kim asti atra uchyate yatnadapi paraklesham hartum ya hridi jayate ichha bhumi surashrestha sa daya parikirtita. Astu, so this doubling of the tha is something that you find in the older language form. But atra, so I'd like you to try and figure this out with me. Astu, tari yatnadapi. Kim bhavati tatra? Yatnat api. So with effort also. Paraklesham. Paraklesham, others' troubles. Hartum ya hridi jayate ichha. Hartum, to remove that. Ya hridi, in the heart. Jayate ichha. The interest or the wish to remove somebody else's troubles, even if it includes a certain amount of effort and strain. This Bhumi Surashrestha, hey Bhumi Surashrestha, oh the highest one of divinity on earth, Sa Daya Parikirtita, that quality, that wish is what is known as Daya iti, Uttamam asti. So this is in the Padme here refers to the Padma Purana. Of the Padma Purana it becomes Padme. So these are the kinds of pratyayas that we are going to be seeing. Astu? And that's also a kind of a vritti that has allowed that to happen. So Kriya Yoga Sare Asti Shabda Kalpadrume Milati. Astu, the meaning yatha asmabhi drishtam, oh the best divinity of the earth, Bhumi Surashrestha, the wish which is born in the heart of a person to remove the troubles of others, even though it requires great effort. That is called daya. Tari atra daya lakshanam as a practice kim bhavati? Atmavat sarva bhuteshu yo hitaya shubhaya cha vartate satatam hrishtaha kriya hyesha daya smrita. This is from the Matsya Puranam. Tadapi Shabda Kalpadrume Milati. So what is the meaning? He says, one who is always concerned about the well-being and welfare of others as if for oneself. Atmavat sarva bhuteshu yaha hitaya shubhaya cha vartate satatam hrishtaha is always content. And such actions are considered to be daya. Kriya hi esha daya smrita iti bhavati. Astu, close. And this is one very important, it has a resonance with the verse from the Ishopanishad. In fact, Mahatma Gandhiji said that this is one of the most powerful. This verse alone was there in the Indian culture, we would be able to bring back all of Indian culture practically. So it says, Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanyeva nupashyati sarva bhuteshu chatmanam tato na vijugupsate. So yah tu sarvani bhutani atmani eva anupashyati. One who sees all the worlds in oneself. Sarva bhuteshu chatmanam, and sees oneself in all the worlds. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanyeva nupashyati sarva bhuteshu chatmanam. What happens as a result? Tataha, tato, na vijugupsate. There is no shrinking, there is no disgust, because there is no other. This concept of there is no other is so fundamentally, it's so fundamentally profound and unique to wisdom traditions. The Indic civilization, of course, has excelled in documenting discoveries, various forms of discovering the same truth of the underlying unity of all beings. But this is what we find in wisdom traditions across the world. And in the context of today's war that is taking place, aham chintayami yad vayam sanskritagyaha etad vishayapi chintayama yad katham vayam sanskrite vidyamanasya jnanasya upayogam kartum shaknuma adya vishwa shantyartham etadrisha vicharaha yada bhavanti tari kadapi anyasya hanim kartum na parayama vayam. So if these ideas are there, that what is there in me is there in others, and what is in others in me, one can never really harm another human being, leave it, you will not even be able to harm another creature. Iti bhavati. Astu, ata ete vichara etadrisham adhyayanam atyavashyakam asya asmakam samskaranartham, to cultivate our individuality, our personality, to refine our nature. Astu, agre pashyama. Pare va bandhu varge va mitre dveshtari. This will be a dveshtari. It's a vakara. Huh? Dveshtari va sada atmavad vartitavyam hi dayaisha parikirtita. Okay, so this is an ekadashi tattvam. Okay, so what is it saying? It says pare va bandhu varge va mitre dveshtari va sada. So wherever, it can be in the relative circle, it can be with friends, it can be the enemies. Atmavad vartitavyam. You have to behave as if it is you. So look upon thy neighbor as thyself. It's that same idea that is recurrent in these lines. Hi daya esha parikirtita. So this is what is considered to be daya. And just one small difference there. Look upon thy neighbor as thyself is one way of looking at it. The Indic tradition goes a little further and says, look upon thy neighbor who is thyself, in another form. Okay, so that's quite a different shade that is brought into this discussion. Tari, to conclude, I have a few quotations that I have picked up from different cultures. It's a cross-cultural thing with different wisdom traditions represented here. Tari, atra Sikhism madhye daya is supposed to be one of the highest values. So it says the merit of pilgrimages of holy places, which are 68 of them, and that of other virtues besides, equal not compassion to beings. So that is the value of compassion. Daya in fact is considered to be truth in action. It says truth dawns where truthful counsel is accepted. Seeking familiarity with compassion, one gives away virtuous charity. This is all in the Guru Granth Sahib. Anantaram vadati, daya is in reality true action or action par excellence. That's karnisar. And as are truth and contentment, the other two high virtues. Astu. Tari etat sarvam dayayaha mahatmyam vishaye vartate. So in Tamil literature also you find this. There exists this stupendous beauty called compassion, and therefore the world exists. It is compassion that keeps the world functioning as it should. There are those who lack it and they burden the earth. And then an eye that is not abound with compassion, what purpose is it serving on the face, feigning existence? Those who lack compassion have no eyes. Who truly have eyes can't lack compassion. I mean, he just embeds it in the vision. If that vision is not compassionate, then the eyes are of no use, says Thiruvalluvar in his famous Tamil ancient treatise known as Tirukkural. Punaha atra Dalai Lama api vadati, Buddhism madhye api dayayaha bahu mahatmyam vartate. Tari saha vadati yat love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. And finally, words from Rumi. So he says, listen with ears of tolerance, see through the eyes of compassion, speak with the language of love. Astu, Tari, if we can even implement a little of this, I think we'll go a long way in practicing the Sanatana Dharma. That is what is the root of a lot of this discussion we're having, that the concept of Dharma is not about religion. The concept of Dharma is about values and practices that were required or expected from every Bharatiya to implement in their lives. Atra references santi. Bahu dhanyavadah. Tari asham karomi adya tu kinchit overview eva asit. Agami vare vayam itopi gabhira rupena vayam vachyanam अथवा प्रयोग voices तेषां किञ्चित् परिचयं प्राप्स्यामः. तावत् पर्यन्तम् अभ्यासं कुर्वन्तु. सम्भाषणस्य तु अभ्यासं कुर्वन्तु एव, तेनैव यत्किमपि पठामः तस्य वास्तविकास्वादनं भवति. So you get the real taste when you're able to actually implement it in your speech. Namaste.